Well, hey y'all, it is the top of the hour. It's past the top of the hour. First things first, would love to welcome our new guest and official Red Canary merch model, Chris Tillett from Palo Alto Networks. So thanks for being on, Chris.
Hey
Really
man,
appreciate
thanks for
it.
coming.
Um, I guess before we get into the show, I just wanted to give you a moment to introduce yourself, and I think would love to understand a little bit of your background, just kind of like how you ended up where you are today, and I guess the bits you think are relevant, just so folks understand who they're listening to and potentially arguing with later.
So I actually came into this world by accident. I was going into construction. I was doing concrete and electrical work, and this is back in the 90s. So I was only going to high school just enough to graduate, and then after 2 hours, I would go and actually work a full-time job. And so I was running cable, and basically at that point, I started doing troubleshooting for Novell Networks. And that's kind of how my career started. And then next thing you knew, I found myself at 19 years of age, living in New York City, running a full like 500 person network that was running production. So I learned a lot about no excuses, just make it work. And so basically, how I got into cyber was I was the masochist that could work on Mac OS, traditional Mac OS, Linux, Unix, Windows NT 3.1, and all that fun stuff. So they handed me the checkpoint firewall and said, "Hey, you might be able to get this to work." And from there, that's been my focus. I've done a lot of insider threat investigations. It's kind of a favorite topic of mine. I've actually walked CFOs out the door like this, as well as SVPs. And that's cost me a lot of time in my life, energy, and it's why I have gray hair. So I'm a very jaded SIM person. I hate SIM. I hate everything about it. I hate the fact that, Microsoft Excel and Notepad++ is the real interface of the SOC. And that was my goal when I came to Palo. As I said, I finally want to end that nonsense.
That's
That's a fantastic tee up because like I'm going to want to hear about why XIM isn't just the next sim. So this is fantastic. I got to tell you, I have bad flashbacks when you talk about Novell. I remember watching Novell machines, netware machines, just blow up because of a stack recursion in a program that we were troubleshooting. Like nothing should blow up that hard if you've got a code error. So
Yes.
bad times.
ArcServe on Novell lost me a lot of sleep. So yeah,
I bet it did.
yeah.
Well, an enterprise IT time machine. I love it. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. So, in the interest of transparency, like I know who and where you are now. I had no idea where you came from, so I looked and kind of have this well, this is not like an original idea, but it's no matter where you work, everyone should have to work in the service industry at some point in your life. And
Yeah.
when it comes to cybersecurity, I have this like kind of deep-seated belief that like everyone should work like network engineering, help desk, like just there is a scarcity of people who learned how computers work and how they talk before they tried to keep them safe. And so I was sitting there skimming through LinkedIn. I was like, this all makes sense now.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've actually owned retail stores in my past. So I've actually been the person that actually checked out people as even while I was doing this, owned a retail environment and actually checked people out and learned a lot from that. And my favorite thing when I go away from cybersecurity is actually warehousing and distribution. And so if you think about how a warehousing and distribution works, it's exactly how a SOC functions. And so if you've done an SAP or NetSuite or anything like that, that it's actually, if you get into a SOC, you have to think about it in that manner. And so actually those environments humbled me. They kicked my head in because if you're not shipping, you're not making money.
yeah,
And
very
so
cool.
I learned a lot from them.
I love it.
Yeah, so I'm going to need you to connect the dots. Say more about what the connection between warehousing and the SOC is.
Well,
So,
hey, tell you what, push pause on that because I
Yeah,
would
all
like
right.
to.
By the way,
Yeah,
this is why Chris was invited, because we sat down over dinner with the team, and like I thought, we can talk forever. This is going to be amazing. So I'm probably going to keep me honest here, Keith. Thanks.
oh, all good. Only because selfishly, I need to learn and want to learn a little bit more about kind of like the vision and problem space, and so we will 100% come back to that.
All right.
So, uh, so Chris, part of the intro here is that we always like to start by taking a question like that's come in to office hours at redcanary.com or that folks have sent us before. And so um, a couple weeks ago or like the last couple sessions, we've touched on this concept of like the minimum viable security stack. Like what if you could only have a couple or a few things, what would they be? And so like we've tinkered with that. And so as I was going through and reading these, uh, there was a similar twist on that question, which is like, what when we think about like an ideal stack or more comprehensive, like so not saying you can only have a couple things. If you're or aspire to be a mature enterprise, like what does that tool stack look like? And like less so, feel free to name things if you want, but I think in general, just understanding like the big moving parts that a mature organization can no longer live without. And so, uh, so Dave, I'm gonna kick it to you first since you've
Yeah.
had equally zero time to prepare. You're
I
signed up
looked
for
at it
this
ahead
every
of
week.
time, so I'm going to buy
Love
Chris
it.
some
Go ahead.
time on this. So I'm gonna talk about this. When I was thinking about how I would answer this, like the first thing that you've got to answer before you say what are the comprehensive tools that you need for a comprehensive program, you need to answer what are the jobs to be done. I was thinking about this in terms of my wood shop. Like, what is the minimum thing you need? You need to be able to cut. You need to be able to make holes. You need to be able to flatten, and you need to be able to sort of connect stuff. Like with those four things, you can build most everything. So, like you need a saw. Does it have to be a table saw? Does it have to be a skill saw? Nope. You need a saw. You need a set of chisels, probably. You need some planes, and you probably need something like a drill to bore holes. With those four tools, you can do all the jobs. Are you going to do them quick? Are you going to do them as effectively or as skillfully as someone who has all these professional power tools? No. So I backed up from there and said, like, what are the core things that you need to do? And the way I think about that is I start from the NIST CSF framework. My job is to identify what needs to be protected, to put in place protective controls, detective controls, and I need the capacity to respond and recover. Right. And so when I think about like what are the tools you need for a comprehensive thing, like when you think about identifying the things in your environment, you could do a lot of the identification with things that you could that live off the land, right? You can maintain an asset inventory with a spreadsheet, right? But things like your identities, like you're not going to do that without custom tooling. So tool number one, you've got to have a strong identity tool, identity provider. You're going to need some kind of strong, probably combined detective and preventative control around what's running in your environment. Like you need visibility into that environment so you can see what's going on. That's why I'm always going to come back to some kind of EDR, some type of monitoring type thing as a foundational tool that you've got to have. And you've got to have tools for making sense of that information, whether it be an elk stack or a real SIM, but you need some way of making sense of all that data. And you need some kind of interface to programmatically assess the configuration and health of your fleet. Right. That could be any number of tools. Like you may home roll a bunch of stuff. If you're an AWS shop, you may home roll it with AWS scripts, or you may use a tool like Wiz. Like so, I'm still kind of going back to the type of stuff that I said you need. My first three choices. But really, what I think about is like if you're gonna tackle this problem, you need to stop and think about what are the jobs to be done and what are the tools that you can't just pick up. What are the jobs you can't do with the tools that you already have in your environment, and those are the ones that you start with first.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think I think the abstraction is helpful too. We've kind of talked through stuff like the cyber defense matrix, right? And just figuring out kind of like the big technology domains that exist in the environment, and then just agreeing on those jobs to be done for effective kind of incident management, right? Detection through response. So I think that's a super helpful take. I will, this is a handy point to turn it over to Chris, because I am a firm believer that most of the real hard work when it comes to threat hunting and incident response happens in spreadsheets, and that we would die as an industry without them. And so, Chris, I know this pains you, and that this is why Dave.
That's why you're here, Chris.
Dave unprompted invoked the spreadsheet. You have already fired a shot across the bow. So, all right, take us
I'm gonna
through
burn
your
this
stack.
shirt right now. No, I'm just kidding.
I appreciate it.
I'm teasing. So at the end of the day, everything. See, here's the problem. And again, I deal with the analyst community all day long, but what they have done is they've quadranted our brain. It's everything that we're talking about is telemetry, a capture point, and a control point. That's it. So go back to the original premise of SIM and bring in everything into a bit bucket, write rules around it, or have it machine learning around it, and then add controls to it. So I have a friend of mine who does red teaming. And what's very interesting is I said, all right, so you guys offer, you red team, and they do very large universities. As a matter of fact, some very prestigious ones in the Northeast. I'll just leave it at that. And I'm like, all right, so when you guys come back 6 months later and do your recheck, how many of them have actually put the controls in place? 1 in 3. So they've owned the environment. They've owned it. There's literally an S3 bucket with like encryption keys and passwords and usernames, and they haven't done the job. Why? So to me, it goes back to governance first. You got to govern yourself first. If you want to lose weight, you can't be shoving cupcakes down your pie hole and then blaming your hormones. You actually have to govern yourself, right? You got to go work out, right? So you can say all you want and you can have all these other things around you. I'm going to do fasting. I'm going to do this, that, and the other. But you've got to have daily discipline. So your controls have got to be tight, okay? You got to understand from the business side, what am I trying to protect? And then that goes all, so when I talk to customers, what are you trying to do? That's why I love data and warehousing. I'm trying to ship stuff out the door. So how do I ship stuff out the door as fast as possible? I enable the person that's picking that stuff to be as efficient as possible. How do they get the boxes? How do they scan the QR codes? How do they do all that stuff? That's all. So when we bring it all back, I'm like, okay, when I ship a box out, do I care that there's an EDR and an NDR and all that stuff in it? No. What I care about is the appropriate controls are in place. Because here's the thing about the fancy EDRs that no one wants to talk about, including us. Every red team environment I've been in, they all get turned off. So what do you do then? Well, we hope it doesn't happen. Well, guess what? Hope is not a strategy. I can't build a business off of hope. I can't go get $100 million from VCs off hope. So I have to have controls in place. Then I have to decide what will enable me to visualize those controls. And when I was at another competitor, it was very interesting. I had a beautiful timeline of how someone stole information from them. And the first thing the CISO told me is, Chris, I wish you had stopped it. So my goal was, when I came to Palo, was to kill the quadrants. To me, it's telemetry, a capture point, and a control point. So how do I gather the telemetry that I need? How do I visualize it to understand and then write machine learning rules and models against it? You're not going to scale without machine learning. You can talk about static rules all you want, but if you're trying to catch a privileged user, your static rules won't work. You've got to have ML to understand where their baselines are compared to their peers And then your static rules might work after you've put them through that scenario. And then I've got to have an automation layer. And then I'm going to go in with DLP. I know it's old and disgusting and gross. DLP has been done poorly. And listen, I had to walk out. It was 3 months of my life to fire the CFO off of semantic Vontu, semantic endpoint, and ArcSight. So believe me, I know the grossness of it. But you got to be able to classify your data and understand what those data, what that data means to your organization, and then do something with it.
Okay, so I just got to ask, who's doing that well?
Yeah.
From DLP, no one.
Yeah.
It's gross.
So let me if I could ask
it's
you,
absolutely disgusting because of the data classification issue.
I was just going to ask who's classifying their data. Not even well. I would love to know who's doing it at all.
All right, so a buddy of mine.
So I will say this: there might be something that I'm working on at this moment.
All right, so tell you what, so let's dig into that, because I think I'm familiar. I don't know if everyone else is familiar, and so would love to have you kind of give us the, I'd say, what are you doing today, and if there's a more pointed version of that question, I'd say like, what is the big idea behind something like XIM, and like, what's the problem you think you're solving? And I feel like you've kind of already like walked us into that a little bit, but would love to understand from your perspective, like, what is that? But like, most importantly, like, what's the problem or the transformation you think that's going to drive?
And before you answer that, Chris, I suspect that's going to tie back to your killing off the quadrants, and I have no idea what you mean by killing off the quadrants. So if you would include that in your answer, please.
I will. Yes. So bottom line is this: when I came to Palo, they asked me literally, what do you hate about the market? Like, what do you hate? And I said, well, this is the issues that I'm seeing from my customers. This is their struggles. And yeah, I came from a UABA company and we plugged on top of SIM and we could do this, that, and the other. But what I noticed is there was no one taking an entire approach to it. And so what they came to me and they said, look, we feel like endpoint is basically going to be, basically endpoint's going to become free at a certain point, right? It's just a way to capture telemetry. So it's a race to the bottom. If you go into right now and you do an EDR compete against SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, you're literally scraping, pennies off the ground. And I said, well, that's the problem, is that, it's easy to deploy, but most people, they can do certain amount of things with it. But then once they have to associate that data source with Windows event logs, and then something with AWS, and then something with like Proofpoint, and tie all that together, now all of a sudden you're in level 3 of the SOC. And it's like, well, that should be a level 1 kind of activity. So how do we get there? And so what it was us dumping our SIM, dumping our data lake. We had the data lake of hope that everyone thinks that they can build, until they realize it's a lot harder than they think just to get data in consistently. So we dumped our data lake of hope, we dumped our SIM, and we poured everything in and said, look, we're going to stitch all this together and make a story out of it. Because we know the stories. We know that if something comes in via Proofpoint, then takes over the machine, and then all of a sudden causes lateral movement across, and it's doing 4678, 4768s and 4769s. It walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. So now at this point, we can contain it.
All right. So the core idea is
one quick second. So our customers, who again, we spent $500 million on a SOAR tool, and the only way we had customers that really flushed it out was by having a resident engineer, because people's detection wasn't good enough to offer a complete automation. So the detection wasn't there because of the fact that it required manual triage. You go into a Splunk shop, and what are they doing? They're manually querying raw logs. Here in Richmond, Virginia, there's 2 SOCs that pulled Splunk out because they don't want people, it's called curious analyst syndrome. They don't want them hunting down into stuff that is not relevant or germane to the incident that they're working on. So it's all of that combined into one thing, if I'm making sense.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, are you saying that, that you sort of your guys' big idea is that the connection of telemetry from across all the sources should, from the very beginning, be considered as one pot of things that we should be looking at coherently,
That's
as
correct.
opposed to that happening at the third layer of the SOC.
Yeah.
It should actually be the first thing that's happening.
Yes. I call it the nice telemetry, network identity cloud endpoint. So all these, people buying cloud stuff and buying Wiz and any other, congratulations. You're just now getting to what we were doing in 2021.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's just telemetry. How do we stitch it all together and tell the story? Because if I have somebody that comes in over an S3 bucket, then moves to an Amazon VPC, and then moves over to here, how is that not all together in one story?
Right. So getting rid of the quadrants means I'm getting rid of all this differentiation between all these tools, because what they are is that at the end of the day, they're all telemetry.
Yeah.
They're all control points.
What's a firewall?
Yeah.
Let me,
so yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. I think there, you keyed in on something that I hadn't thought about. I have thought about probably more of the days of my life than I care to admit, but not in the context of this conversation, which was everyone kind of starts with the security program or security operations team, and find the threat, stop the threat, rinse and repeat, right? Like there's a bunch of other jobs. I get it. But like job one, don't let bad things happen to the company. And I think what I really love about the way you positioned that is that usually what happens is, with the best of intentions, you say, all right, we're going to build a security program. We've got these tools, and now we need a SIM. And it kind of becomes this situation where the SIM becomes like the ruling activity, which is just getting data into it. My biggest observation from my time here is that the majority of folks who have a SIM, they're as valuable as you have time to ask them questions and then to run those leads to ground, right? There's like a direct correlation between the value of that data and your ability to ask it the right questions and figure out, is this good or bad?
Mm-hmm.
But what typically, it kind of ends up being this insidious trap where you're diverting really valuable, usually increasingly limited resources towards just care and feeding of that thing. And very few organizations get to the point where you're building use cases, doing what I'd say is like meaningful threat hunting, like where you're finding bad things and stopping them, just because like the more mature the program becomes, the more data you have, and therefore the more of this kind of like this just like kind of plumbing activity consumes time and space. And so it's really interesting hearing you position it that way, which is just, start with, if I understand what you were, or one of the through lines, I think from what I heard you say is like, get the right cross section of data in there. But first and foremost, like, let's try to eliminate as much of the engineering activity as possible so that we can just focus on the real work, which is, I think, that's like the beating heart of security operations, right? And like, it does get overtaken, I think, sometimes by the act of security engineering. And it's like, it's out of necessity, but it's just like, it's the tools we've had and the platforms that people have been given for years and years.
Well, I've gone into security programs. I have the privilege of talking to SOC leaders numerous times a week. And you're absolutely right on. I've actually seen people leave, like some companies like JP Morgan Chase, and now they're the CISO, and they bring in everything that JP Morgan Chase had. And then they realize, oh, I didn't realize there was 70 people keeping that thing alive.
Yeah.
That doing the parsing, the normalization. When I present the architecture to GSIs, the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, wait a minute, you mean to tell me I don't have to have my smartest people shipping logs constantly? Like literally, they have their smartest people just doing this with logs all day long, making sure it's shipped, making sure the data models are accelerated, all this stuff, versus a very simplified architecture. And now I can have people in the data, not on the data. On the data is cool, but we've been doing that for 20 years. I need people in the data. And so that's where it comes in. And so That's where, and by the way, someone's asking me right now to explain the 30-30-30
I was
model.
just going to ask because I'm not sure what that is, but
Yes. So our analysts, if you go into our analysts, we went from 10,000 people in 2021 to 18,000 people. We've added 2 SOC analysts in that amount of time. When I went to Deloitte and IBM, who's run huge SOCs, they told me, and by the way, we also added 36 times the amount of data from our SIM into XIM. So we're at 100 terabytes a day. Very large. Most organizations are nowhere near that. Our analysts were working 18 to 22 tickets a day. They had 0 proactive capabilities. There was 9 people working just incidents. When we moved over to an ML forward and automation forward world, they're now working 30% of their time on incidents. The other 30% is on proactive threat hunting. So just the other day, they messaged me and said, hey, Chris, you haven't run Docker Desktop on your Mac in over 90 days. Can we remove that attack surface? Sure, go right ahead. Right? They were looking for stuff. And then the other 30% is on automation routines. Now, some of you that are able to do math, you're like, okay. And by the way, it's a trust but verify. We just don't go and automate all the things. You never want to lock out the CFO on the last day of the quarter. So you trust but verify the automation routines. But the last 10% that most people, have kind of done some math is, well, what else are they doing? They're actually doing SOC tours. So my analysts have done over 500 in the last 2 years. So it's a very different world once we moved away from XDR, EDR, and SIM and the context switching. When you're constantly having to context switch, you're never going to be as, like, for example, just earlier I was using Teams to talk to a customer, and then yesterday I used WebEx. It sounds something small, but just sharing my screen and this, that, and the other, it makes a difference. It reduces my efficiency. So by having all the telemetry into one ML bucket, again, all the nice telemetry, and then having my automation routines based on that and my incidents based on all of that, it enables me. I've actually gone in and done insider threat investigations for customers where they didn't even realize that they had an issue. And I was able to show them, I had no idea their environment, 0 tribal knowledge, and was able within 5 minutes to identify something that they should investigate.
That's awesome. I love I love the simplicity of the model for sure.
Yeah.
That is great. And
Can I throw you a curveball here? We're at the bottom of the hour here, but can I throw you a curveball, Chris? Like first of all, I just got to point out here when the reason I don't talk to analysts is because when they ask me what I hate, I always answer carnival workers. But like when I look at what XIM is doing, what is your guys' strategy for bringing that and for making that available to smaller companies?
Yeah. So eventually, as time goes on, because again, we started with very, very large organizations. Over time, what we've actually down is we're now actually price competitive with Chronicle or SecOps, excuse me, depending on the actual price that the standard plus or whatever enterprise plus version that they have. So over time, basically, we started with very large organizations, and now that we're able to scale this, and we've been able to scale it, now that it enables our ML to benefit even smaller organizations. So they can immediately gain access to 2,200 data models that we would have only built for the Fortune 40 before that, or anything like that. So, no, we've actually scaled it down by scaling up our business.
I love that. There's an interesting conundrum, right? Where like things like machine learning and AI and stuff like that are inarguably useful. But machine learning in particular benefits from like not just a lot of data, but I think a lot of decisions being made, right? Like also like, really well-informed data, and in particular, like those expert feedback loops, right? Where you've done hundreds or thousands of tens of thousands of investigations. And it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about like the benefit of that in terms of moving down market from the very biggest to the big, mainly because like you do need the biggest of the big in terms of visibility, not like companies, but like you need a pretty massive sample size of like activity and experiences just to be able to, to inform those models and get them to the point where you can drop them in at that point to almost any environment, right? In particular, much smaller ones. And those models, for lack of a better phrase, can like hit the ground running. And so I really love that. That's awesome. Well, this went way faster than I thought. We should have you back. I would
absolutely.
love to talk more about this. And so, Chris, thank you so much. If there's anything you want to say or sign off with before we leave, would
look,
appreciate it.
Any questions by your team,
yeah,
feel free to forward them to me. I'm more than happy to address them. I'm more than happy because I know we talked kind of high level here, but I'm happy to, show where like, listen, I will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly. You're a partner of ours. I want you to be successful, and I don't want you to claiming things that aren't true. But at the same time, I want you to have the confidence to know that we got your back. And so I actually have now 5 red Canary shirts. So I can promise that I'll wear a different shirt each time.
Perfect.
And I've got, 5 pairs of socks. So I'll match all that. And you let me know. I'm more than happy to be back and talk with your team.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. I definitely feel like we cut this about an hour and a half short, unfortunately. But
no, we're going to have you back, Chris. Like I mentioned before, when I told Keith that I wanted to have you on, I said, this is going to be a hoot. He's a ton of fun to talk with. By the way, I got to do a little bit of housekeeping here. We give out swag when people correctly identify quotes. Apparently someone dropped a quote from Community or something. I think it was Keith. I don't know what's going on in the chat, but the quote that I dropped, nobody responded to, because the right response was, I hate carnival workers. They have small hands and they smell like cabbage. That was today's quote.
My hands are XL. Thank you very much. I'm not
good. Clearly not a carnival worker. Thank you for making the time, Chris. It's great having you on. Great conversation.
Take care.
Thank you both. Cheers.
Bye.